Well, you guys got the obnoxious part, right? First question I have is, Austin and Graham, did you two coordinate your outfits together on purpose? Because you have the exact same shirt on. Exact. With a black shirt under it? Is that a brother thing? Like, should we have all worn the same thing today? It was a little interesting. I had a moment there. So as Matt said, I'm Blair, and I am the children's pastor turning family pastor soon. I'm incredibly excited and humbled and slightly scared for this new role. I don't know about you, but anytime I do anything that is considered successful by people, whenever I have to replicate it, I'm always scared that that's never going to happen and it was just a fluke and I just got lucky. So I always, wrestle with that just a bit. And I need to brush up on my teenagerisms, like I'm going to have to really keep checking Urban Dictionary to know about all these things. So I'm a little out of practice, but I'm really excited for what this looks like. I consider it an honor to be able to walk alongside teenagers. I think they have a very special wisdom that they bring to our world that a lot of us miss out on because we're scared of them. If I'm honest, there's nothing like a teenager looking at you like you are losing it. But they do have a lot of wisdom to share. So I'm thrilled to step into that space next week. And for those who are here, we're going to do a big kickoff. I know it's the Panthers' first home game. I get it. But if you didn't get tickets, then you can come and watch the pre-show here with us. We're going to have wings and root beer floats or other drinks if you don't like root beer floats. I realize that's a special thing. But I would love for you to stay after for an hour and just hang out with everybody. We're going to do it on the front lawn, so it's kids, families, teenagers, and anybody who doesn't have kids as well. You're all invited to eat wings with us. So I think it'll be fun. So speaking of wisdom, like I talked about with teenagers, we're in our textuality series, which is probably one of my most favorite series. I'm a little bit of a nerd, which is probably why I went to seminary. But I love that we get to dig together through the adventures and family drama and the history and monsters and magic of the Bible together. I wholeheartedly believe that something surprising, something liberating, and something new will show up in this space this morning. Last year I talked about the story of Jonah, and I used a flannel graph. So I'm really sorry to disappoint you, but I have no flannel graph of Jonah like this year, because this is definitely how he looked as I cut him out of the felt. But we're going to talk about Proverbs today. So no flannel graph, but I think it's going to be just as fun. So I want to start with this big picture of the book of Proverbs. What is actually happening in this book? So Proverbs is an Old Testament book in the Bible, and it's considered one of the books of wisdom literature. Now, it needs other Old Testament books like Ecclesiastes to be really complete, but it's a beautiful work. It's 31 chapters long. It starts with a father-son conversation, and it ends with a mother-son conversation. It's not a book about promises or formulas or laws. It's just poems and ancient proverbs that have been passed down from generation to generation to generation. It's accumulated insight of humanity that acknowledges there's something bigger than just ourselves. And this something bigger ties us together. So in the first chapter of Proverbs, we meet wisdom, and she's raising her voice. Yes, I said she, because wisdom is a woman. Hair flip. She's in this public square, and she's raising her voice, and she's making a speech and inviting all of us to align ourselves with something bigger. And this something bigger is not about IQs. It's not about being smart. In the ancient wisdom tradition, wisdom is actually joy. It's seeing the divine presence in all of humanity. She is inviting us to live to dance, to experience joy, to make the most of our time on earth. She's inviting us to ask ourselves what we're meant to do with our time, our resources, and our hearts. And then she's telling us to do it. She wants to show us how to live so that we experience true, genuine, authentic joy. And wisdom, she is all around us and constantly calling us to join her in this way of life, into ways of generosity, into ways of peace, into ways of compassion, and into ways of learning. Now, we meet wisdom, but we also meet the fool. And the fool is the one who doesn't want to learn, that has no questions, that is selfish, that is egocentric, always the victim, and always prideful. And the fool always chooses death, which is probably not what you think that it is, because in the Old Testament, life and death were considered to be in the present. They were not about a reward or a punishment for later. That only came whenever religion developed. So I want you to keep that in mind. There's a deep respect for life in the wisdom tradition. When we connect with who we really are, we are experiencing wisdom. When we acknowledge that we're part of a bigger story, that we're not God, when we come to the end of ourselves, when our ego deflates, that's where wisdom begins, and that's where power is. And that's where our individualism transforms into something more communal. Because wisdom, she is inviting us into this common life together. She's opening our eyes to this bigger picture that's there and inviting us to align ourselves with our values, because that's when our work actually means something. When we go after the things that make us angry for our world, wisdom moves us towards action. And the joy and the love that we have for humanity, it spills over in this space. So wisdom, I would argue, is the thing that wakes us up, that grounds us, and that spurs us towards making an actual difference. If you want to know if you're choosing to live in this way of wisdom, I'd invite you to reflect for a second. Do you ask yourself sometimes, is this really all there is to this life? Or maybe you notice your sleep. Wisdom speaks to sleep and anxiety and the connections between those often. Do your actions match your beliefs and values everywhere you go? Or do you show up differently based on what the societal norms are? Or do you look around the world and not feel anger or rage about injustice? Your answers to these questions can tell you if you're choosing wisdom and life or foolishness and death. Now, I don't know about you, but if this is the wisdom that I get trained in, dedicated to, or invited to, then I'm all in. This wisdom doesn't draw lines to keep certain people out. This wisdom celebrates questions. This wisdom includes science and nature and divinity in all of humanity. This wisdom is not a long list of to-dos or don'ts. It's way deeper than that, and it's way bigger than that. I want to continue to accept wisdom's invitation to choose life and generosity, compassion, grace, and an unquenchable desire to learn. Now that we've talked about the big picture of Proverbs, I want to focus specifically on Proverbs 22:6. You've probably heard of this verse if you grew up in Christian circles. It says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Or there's the version from the Message, which is point your kids in the right direction. When they're old, they won't be lost. Or there's the last version, the NIV. Some people call it the nearly inerrant version. That was always the joke. Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they're old, they will not turn from it. So, let's start with what we might already know here. And to find out what we might already know about this verse, I say we Google it. That's my favorite. Everybody Googles everything, right? So whenever I say, what does it mean to train up a child in the way they should go, this is what comes up on Google. Here's the first one. So it says, it's a warning to parents that if they allow their children to have their own way, they will not depart from that foolishness when they are older. So what I read here is, no, Cindy, you cannot have that blue popsicle because you're going to end up being blah, blah, blah whenever you get older. You can fill in the blank for whatever the worst case scenario might be for you. If we keep going, the next thing that was in the Google search that popped up was about spiritual responsibility that parents have for their kids. So add that to the continually growing list for parents. I know parents don't have enough to do, so now you have even more on your plate, on your list. And then I think, what does it even mean to have a spiritually responsible child? So whenever you keep going, the next thing that pops up on there is this whole list where there's actually things that you're supposed to pray over for your kid. Pray for their spiritual gifts to be manifest. Pray that they will resist the devil. Pray that they will walk by faith and not by sight. Pray for their spiritual discernment. And pray for their future spouse, because that's important. So there you have. If you didn't grow up hearing this verse, I feel like I've caught you up a little bit. So you're welcome. This verse that we read has been deeply connected to parenting in modern society. But why? I just told you about the book of Proverbs, which was about wisdom. It's really about leaning into wisdom as a way of living and choosing these values of generosity, compassion, grace, learning, and loving in a brave way. So how in the world did we get to the devil, good behavior, and future spouses? I'm so glad you asked. Let's learn, maybe unlearn, or relearn together. I don't think Solomon was sitting around thinking about writing a poem on how to be a better parent. And I think this because the word parenting was not even a word until recently. Yes, as long as there have been human beings, there have always been parents that are there that take care of children. That's not new. But the word parenting as a verb didn't appear in the United States until 1958. And then it only became a common word around the 70s, which happens to be the same time that other evangelical parachurch organizations started to push family values, like focus on the family. Yes, I get it. I watched a lot of McGee and Me. I think that was the name of it growing up. So there's a lot of things that surfaced at that point that dealt around sexual purity, creationism, prayer in schools, and also traditional gender roles. So parenting, now this multi-billion-dollar industry, hasn't even existed that long. And it's coming on the scene and telling us basically everything that we do, because there's arguments on both sides, is either going to ruin our kids or make them the best kids in the world, right? Like one person might say you have to turn your stroller around facing forward or your kids are going to have deep psychological trauma. And then one might say you have to have them facing the other way or they're going to have deep psychological trauma. It's all over the place. But prior to the 60s, this wasn't a thing. And the reason it wasn't a thing is because most kids grew up helping to raise their siblings. Bigger families were present then. Now, the majority of adults, whenever they have kids, have never been around a kid in their life. So what do? They do the exact same thing we just did. They Google it. They watch Instagram reels. They follow people on TikTok. Those are the things that they have to do to figure out how to be a parent. Also, prior to the 60s, most kids lived close to their biological relatives. So I don't know about you, I grew up on a farm, and literally everybody in my family grew up around me. My aunts and uncles were all around me, my grandparents were across the street. So even if my parents weren't around, there was somebody there that was in the space with us. Now we've moved to cities. There's a lot of things that have changed in our society, and so people do move away from their grandparents and their siblings, and you end up settling apart from each other. I don't say all that because I think these are bad things. I think they're just our reality. I think that things evolve and things transform, and they become better versions of themselves because we have more knowledge. I love learning from developmental professionals, researchers, psychologists. I love to hear about how humanity grows and thinks and processes daily life. In our community alone, we have a ton of people that are those people on a social media platform. But while I believe that parenting has evolved, I also believe that it's turned into another goal-oriented thing in our society. It has benchmarks, it measures growth, it measures success, it's turned to a business with a GDP. There are competing promises of formulas and knowledge that will all make you all experts. And this is not the good part. The action of parenting isn't meant to be done by one or two adults who teach a kid how to be a good kid so that they turn into a good adult, or just a good kid that's better than the kid next door. Alison Gopnik, who is a psych professor at UC Berkeley, she proposes that parenting should not be about caring for a child like a carpenter with a finished product in mind, but we should grow our children more like a gardener. She says that the way we're practicing parenting right now is not based in science, and it's not good for parents or for kids. Parenting with expectations can only lead to frustration, resentment, and bitterness. And parenting alone is not realistically possible. So I want to propose that our community here replace the word parenting with humaning. This is a concept by Cindy Wong Brandt. She says that being a better parent simply means being a better human. And being a better human means being a better coworker. It means being a better friend. And being a better human means being more compassionate to our own selves as well. Parenting is not just for parents. It's for anyone who wants to see a better world, because we understand that we all coexist. We all share this space. And parenting this way is revolutionary. It's liberating. And it's experiencing wisdom just as we talked about earlier. Parenting this way changes us. We get to know ourselves better, and it demands that we become better people. Parenting teaches all of us how to manage our triggers, because kids push our buttons. But guess what? It's not that kid's fault. Recognizing that is an invitation into something inside of us that needs attention, healing, or acknowledgement. And that can be something from a traumatic past, or it can just be some kind of trauma that we experience currently because we live in an unkind world. Parenting this way is giving space for the unmet needs inside of us to be healed so that we become more wise people. People whose lives have deep meaning, people filled with joy, people who celebrate each other, people who balance work and play, people who simply want to be better today than they were yesterday. We are all parenting the children of our society. We are all reparenting parts of our own inner child or our teenage selves. We all need to play more. We all need each other to learn and unlearn healthier, relationship habits. Our unmet needs from childhood are the things that require more self-compassion today. We are all being invited into this wisdom, this humaning, this living. And this power we gain from this wisdom is what revolutionizes our community, our city, and this bonkers world that we call home. It's transformative, it's liberating, and it's magical. But it is also hard. Taming our triggers is hard. Changing our thought processes is hard. Choosing ourselves is hard. Doing the work is hard. So today I ask you, the single, the married, the biological parent, the foster parent, the grandparent, where are you parenting or humaning? Who are you parenting or humaning with? How can we expect our kids and our students to grow into justice-seeking, brave, and generous humans when we aren't even choosing to live in that wisdom? We are all being watched, all of you, even if you don't know it. I had a kid say this week, Blippi's an adult? For those who don't know Blippi, you can Google Blippi later, but there was a shock to the fact that Blippi is not a kid. And they said, why do you ask that? And they said, because adults aren't fun. That's a 6-year-old that says that. Come on, people, we got to get it together. We have got to choose wisdom together. We have got to ask ourselves, what are we meant to do with our time, our resources, and our hearts? If you don't already volunteer somewhere, hear me say that we need you here. The ratio of adult to child used to be 1 adult to 5 kids. Now that ratio has flipped. Every kid needs 5 adults. 5 people that show up in their lives. Coaches, biological family members, teachers, church volunteers, mentors, tutors, people who show up to cheer them on, to listen to them without lecturing, and to make time for them in the midst of their own busy lives. 5 gardeners that till their soil, water their souls, and walk through how they cope with the storms, disappointments, and frustrations of life. 5 gardeners that remind them that there is poop of life. And it sucks. And it's probably going to only make them more healthy, but it sucks in the moment. 5 gardeners that are there to ponder with them, to cultivate their hearts and dreams. 5 gardeners who aren't getting rid of a plant because it doesn't match the rest of them. 5 gardeners who are not worried about growing the biggest potato or squash in the garden. But instead they are loving them and supporting them to become their wisest self. 5 gardeners that get the opportunity to learn from them, from the kids. And they give them uninterrupted time that has no manipulative agenda. In order for us to accept wisdom's invitation, we have to become more human so that we actually live. And kids and teenagers and minors and children, whatever you want to call them, they are one of the most marginalized groups in our society. They have no money. They have no financial assets. They're completely dependent, and they require a lot of resources. But they are also one of the best ways that we reflect on each other and that make us better people. And if being a kid isn't enough, most actually contain multiple intersectional oppressions. The kid who is gay or trans or refugee, disabled, black or brown. Society is constantly erasing kids' voices. Without them, though, we will never thrive. Not today, not in 5 years, not in 10 years. As Lila Watson says, if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come up because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Parenting Society's children will help us to view the world through their eyes. Parenting Society's children will bring back our happiness and learning through play. Then we will become wise people of generosity and peace and compassion and learning. And we all have a chance to be part of this messy, hard, and healing revolution. We're not looking for perfect adults. Friends, I could stand up here and tell you story after story of adults that showed up in my life. They chose to be there the best and the worst of times, the hardest times. But they supported me and they loved me. And I still have a relationship with these people. And we disagree about theology and politics. But they chose to show up. And that's what I needed. So perfection is not what we're looking for. But that's what society has told us. But remember, with wisdom, there are no success markers, no goals, no true experts, and no formulas that help us get through this. That is propaganda that promises a way of wholeness and perfection, and it's not real. We are all existing in this imperfect world that includes pain and trauma from unjust systems and broken narratives. So maybe parenting looks like getting to know your neighbors better. Maybe it means showing up for more of your friends with kids. Maybe it means tutoring with heart math. Maybe it's actually becoming a foster parent. Or maybe you could volunteer in greenhouse. It's my shameless plug. Seriously though, I know you get tired of hearing me say it, but I genuinely believe that 2 hours, one Sunday a month with our kids will change your life. And I am always inviting you to be part of this beautiful garden that we are cultivating. I've put a paper on your chairs and there's a pen. This is a resource inventory. I'm trying to just figure out what our community has. If you mark that you have a jet ski, I promise I'm not just going to assume we get to use it. So anything you say yes to on there will be something that we have a conversation about. But if you do have any of those things or you're willing to share anything that's on there, I invite you to fill that out and drop it in our boxes. I would love for you all, every person in this room, to be part of healing from previous childhood experiences and striving to prevent traumatic childcare experiences. We're daring to imagine a new present and a future that we believe is possible. And the invitation into this meaningful work, it stands. You and I are the stewards of our time, energy, and resources. Let's heal together. Let's learn together. Let's grow together. Wisdom is inviting you and me to live.